just home and love.
The story today.
Welcome to episode 53. Welcome to the Alarpa podcast and another edition of Storytime. This week's story is called Vagabond Greens. Enjoy. This is just a little intro. I know I said I was going to do away with those intros because the podcast is in its little in-between moments between Mary being here and coming back. But you know what? I thought, why not? I'll stick one in because there's some cool music I want to play in the background. And I like the sound of my voice talking. That's only half true. But today is a Storytime edition. I think it's the 5th episode of it. If it's the 4th one, I apologise. So don't take me too seriously when it comes to numbers and all that kind of jazz. But I'm really happy with how it's been going, the whole writing. I've been writing kind of for the last 2 or 3 days now. And it's been really productive. I've been able to do close to 3,000 words, and it's just flowing out of me. It's marvellous, it's brilliant. And I was worried about starting because it's been on my mind for a while and I didn't know where to kind of dig into the story. And now that I've started, it's all unfolding before my inner eye, my mind's eye, and I think it's really nice. It's a really nice feeling to have that, and I can kind of see the other elements of the story that are going to come into play, and it's very therapeutic. I think doctors describe running if you have depression, but I think writing as well. Even if you are afraid of having a pen, just write something. I think it's always going to make you feel better. It's a very cathartic experience. And also as well, it helps me kind of articulate things that I'm trying to think through. That's not to say, of course, that you can only write when you're feeling pissed off or if you're feeling down, because I think inspiration comes from many sides. So you can write in a variety of emotional states. The stories coming together. I've mentioned, I think, a little bit before on other podcasts about how surprising it is, the unconscious mind, how generally you could be exposed to things through newspapers, you're thinking things, you're reading, and then it's all this kind of soup of ideas, and then when you actually sit down, you learn how to thread some, maybe all of those together, and you have a coherent narrative based on some kind of wider culture or with a deeper meaning in your references, for example. So, if you fancy reading a book or doing something or watching a TV show, allow yourself that time, because it does feed into your narrative and your imagination. So I'm going to read you an excerpt from a story I've been working on, and it has different elements in it. One thing I will mention is about St. Brendan's Voyage, which is an amazing story of a saint called St. Brendan who travelled in a little curragh boat with a few other holy men to from Ireland to America, and very tall tales, speaking of islands of sheep and huge ice kind of walls. And of course now we can kind of assume that he's talking about the Faroe Islands, Iceland, and that these stories that developed long legs and became tall tales are based, as most myths probably are, in real events. And in the 1970s, an Englishman called Tim Severin recreated that trip. Took him a year to do it with a crew of around 6 men, I think. And he managed to get to America. after a year of traveling in a boat like that as well. My favorite part of that story is how they land on an island, and it turns out to be a whale. So, interesting story. So, without further ado, a little bit of a music interlude, and then the next time you hear my voice, it's going to be a story. Riding these new rails, there was a vacancy for an inebriated loudmouth. This quiet hole was unlikely to be filled on this line, populated as it was by business people, students, and the constant O'Donnell. Nobody ate or spoke, but one lady did eat a ball of pure sugar for breakfast. O'Donnell's heart fell a little when he realised there was no fingerless gloves in sight, nor cold beans being dug out from a can by a worn fork. They were, unfortunately, earnest Yanks with press shirts, boyish jumpers, name tags, and Bibles. Jesus, if he'd been on the 705 to Penarich Martin, wouldn't have needed a badge declaring his name. One look at the thorns on top of that fine head of hair, and that'd be enough to confirm anyone's suspicions. Yep, that's him all right. Looks taller on the cross. The key in a situation like this is to stare forward or down, perhaps even feign sleeping. O'Donnell was banking on his vague air of depression to ward him off. Being surprisingly naive in this moment, the melancholic teacher was like a red light to an Amsterdam tourist, and he didn't realise that one of them had already homed in on him. This was a potentially fatal aligning of the stars, because O'Donnell, who was usually laid low in the morning, had woken up on a November morning. In this liturgy, the deal that was struck joined the believer more painfully aware of his situation, and the rushed reassurances that promised, guaranteed even, that better things lay ahead. And by the time Christmas is over, January rolled around, and it started again. January had the nippiness of November, and even deeper pockets. "How are you doing, friend?" The septic tank sat down next to him. He was handsome, strong, and seemed capable of doing fierce damage to an altar in the middle of a point. Clean-shaven and smiling, or with a long beard of biblical conviction, O'Donnell realised that his eyes probably wouldn't change all that much. Some people have an air about them. "Not bad," O'Donnell replied. Americans never usually wait for a response, but he answered through the missionary slightly. For a Paddy, it was just a response, which was non-committal to the untrained ear, but complete with culturally appropriate ennui for the potato eater. "Good, good. Say, have you heard the truth?" "Even if I have, sure I like hearing it." "Good, good. God loves you. Tell me, you go to Mass here?" "On occasion." O'Donnell was lying. He wasn't even sure if he believed in the whole thing, but he played along regardless to cover his bases. It wasn't his fault, the not going. Back home, churches remained open, and a believer could pop in and light a candle for the Leaving Cert and touch the foot of St. Anthony. In Madrid, holy places were locked until the coming of the priest, who rolled back the stone of anti-theft, allowing the light to peep in. O'Donnell liked cutting out the middleman and walking around the chapel between masses, checking out the windows, the organ, the big man. Sitting there like Manet's Christ, more dead than alive, but right where he was supposed to be. "There's a good community here. Blah, blah, blah." The Yank trailed off as O'Donnell's mind took over, and he felt uncomfortable. European churches were too big, and they usually had a large square in the centre with chairs all the way around. Who's chewing gum, praying, fiddling with their sleeve? It was all observable. That was probably the point. At times like these, he dreamed of being a Dutchman, with large windows opening out in the canal, and a hidden church in the attic, replete with gilded vestments for the holy avatar. Be the host that can boast the most holy ghost. The metro carriage was simply the wrong shape. It wasn't a Christian shape. If you come, you can meet a swell bunch of people. They're so fun to hang out with, and they do lots of social activities. People meet their wives there. O'Donnell's ears were pricked by that last part, but then he dismissed the notion as easily as it came to him. Half those girls, he posited, were half married to Jesus, and he didn't fancy competing with that. Still, he concluded, he could still bring the ride to the table. Hell, even on it. How do you spend your day? O'Donnell, coming up for air from his foray into deep thought, replied, Well, I move around a lot. I'm on the street a lot, like a homeless person. It's nice, isn't it, being out in the open, moving about? I suppose it is. Get a real feel for people. You see what their daily struggles are. Indeed. You're Irish, yeah? I am. Good people. They have the faith. Hey, how about coming down this weekend to our church gathering? I'll be there. O'Donnell, needless to say, wouldn't be there, but he took the leaflet, taking advantage of the opportunity to later practice his Spanish reading comprehension. Thus, the publication joined socialist pamphlets and fascist dailies as sources of brotherly vocabulary, steel-tipped grammar. In his world, nothing shouted fluent in a second language better than the capacity to ask for directions, buy groceries, and navigate the intricacies of the post-Vatican II sermon. At the very least, he concluded to himself, the Yank had started on the granny by this point, it would be, no matter how broken or staggered in its enunciation, be an honest account of his experiences in the city. Looking down at the pages of it, O'Donnell, the lapsed Catholic, surveyed alcoholics and delinquents. He moved toward the light by climbing onto the escalator. On page 7, a nun spoke. Simply by having the story between his hands, he realized that he actually cared about what she had to say. The Yank wandered, braided, bearded, ashen-faced, barefoot, subsisting on donations of time, wandering like Christ before him, like the wretched swirling out of coffin ships. It was a fucker of a station, long and laborious, where narrow corridors sorted people into different directions. At different stations, Africans kneeled over white blankets covered with trinkets and cheap toys. Sometimes gypsies looked grimly over a spread of jewellery. In the distance, a woman warbled Robbie Williams, and the echoes couldn't escape the tonal murder of angels. O'Donnell was on the move. As a man of obligations, he had one podcast pending, The Weekly Listen, and the class he was making his way toward. The secretary there often kissed him on both cheeks. Once, he recollected, his hand hung off her hip as she moved from one cheek to the other, across the nose. The surge that occupied both groin and pit of stomach made him feel funny, lonely. It was touch and go if the student there would actually take the class. O'Donnell braced himself for either outcome, half desirous of giving class and half inclined not to mind, though in reality he would be stung if the student couldn't be persuaded to attend. Hello, Art. Today I can only do half the class. Fine, no problem. Compromise, where little things die. O'Donnell was climbing out of those cheeks. On a good day for O'Donnell, a class could be like waking up. Then, slumber would come back quickly after the lesson had finished, as if it had taken a cigarette break while he was speaking. On other days, islands of sheepish accountants would flee from having to speak in a second tongue, while flotillas of icy shoulders moved in a fixed direction away from the itinerant teacher. Why is this guy in her office? Each company a whale, prone to bucking its head and tail at a moment's notice. It seemed that the O'Donnell cartel had come from the hills, with only their lust for blood outshining the metal of their ammo belts. They were mean sons of bitches, openly flouting EU regulation by lighting up cigars indoors, aggressively cleaning their knives with paper from the photocopier. The vainest of the gang used the gleam of computer screens to fix their hats and their stares. Any bastard here not knowing his ABCs. O'Donnell rubbed his jawline. He quickly checked to see if he had a banded stubble. Soft and red, his slight beard was Irish and inoffensively modern. It grew too slowly for his liking, but he knew that if he let it be, he'd be able to participate in some future Movember. Probably after 5 years of growth, then. Spanish girls liked it. Unkept and red, it spoke to them of wild abandon, or Vikings. For some of the Opus Dei girls, it was probably because it reminded them of their nationalist flag. I'll retard, tipping away day by day. Keep the wolf from the door, no rest for the wicked. Give us mate the weak and eight and send away the poor. O'Donnell had bumped into a colleague from the academy. A middle-aged Dubliner, he spoke passionately and distinctively. Some say the past is a different country, but sometimes O'Donnell found that other parts of the same country were a different country. The Dubliner had seen inner-city heroin needles and punks versus Nazis. O'Donnell, from a sleepy Limerick town, merely lived with the daily mild threat of implicit violence from wasters and the spawn of pig-fuckers. Though he had found a used condom once while on a school nature walk. But he and his friend, who barely remembered the names of trees or plants, were baffled. I think it stops AIDS, the friend said, and mad cow disease. Well, how was the class? The Dubliner asked back in the present moment. O'Donnell, who once bristled when English writers represented the Irish cadence with D's and peculiarities, had to admit that he, if recording the moment for posterity, would probably have to do the same. It was alright, like. The Chinese don't use money or credit cards. To be fair, it's fucking class to see it. They'd be making digital transfers to buskers and homeless people, even. Good stuff, the Dubliner replied. Don't think I'll be giving the whores my fingerprint, or my biometrics. It's a pain in the hole, I know, but it's the way the world's going. We don't have a prayer. As long as they don't shove a chip up your arse so you can download songs from iTunes by squeezing your cheeks or something, then it'll be grand. Just about. His words filled the bus, O'Donnell noticed, but the Spanish he knew were loud themselves. Search for the El Arpa Podcast on your podcast app, on Twitter, YouTube, and our website, elarpamedia.com.